Hello and welcome to tonight's Storyworks Roundtable. Robert and I are holding down the fort while Catherine is off on some family business, and we are talking about action scenes. So, what is an action scene? I'll let you take that one. Fisticuffs, is it? Maybe, could be.
Anytime there's physical movement of something, could be an inanimate object, could be characters. Hopefully it's characters. No one wants to read a book about inanimate objects getting physical.
Right. Maybe. Depends. Beauty and the Beast has a lot of, Disney's version has a lot of inanimate objects that are animated, right? So
right. Yeah. But they give
depends
them
on the object. Well, that's true. Yes, they are anthropomorphized, and even people. All right. So, well, are we going to define action scenes in the sense of an action movie? Like you've got to have a high-speed chase or a fight or something, or can it be broader than that?
It's probably a good place to start, actually. Otherwise, we get lost in the broadness of it. And because I think you can zero in on that, because they're the things probably that a lot of writers maybe find tough to write.
Yeah.
To have them seem realistic, and yet the movies are able to carry that off because they've got stuntmen and multiple camera angles, and you don't have that luxury in writing. So you do, but it takes some expertise. So why don't we start with that?
Yeah, no, you do not have all of that, do you? The film crew and the light crew and the sound effects guys and the FX guys. No, you just have your narrator and your characters. So that is a good place to start. Okay, so step one with an action scene. Choreograph it, figure out your goal, who's doing what to whom and in what setting and with what kind of props. Is that where you start when you write an action scene?
I think also that's a very good question. I suspect that I probably know where I want to go with it because I made so many mistakes with scene planning in my early days writing that I now know that it's got to move it forward some way. So it's not a fight just for the sake of a fight. We assume we're starting with fights or fight type combative scenes. Then I sort of know where that needs to end. Is it going to end with someone being badly injured, or is it going to end with someone being victorious who needs to be, or someone losing who needed to be victorious? So I suppose in that sense, then you can start chunking it down into what are the various, stage markers you've got to get through to each point. I suppose in a way, thinking a little bit like a movie director, where you sort of think, okay, what parts of this action sequence do I really need to show that are meaningful? Just as you would in plotting out scenes.
Right. Okay, so could we say that the starting point is identifying the purpose of the scene within the larger story? Because you're talking about knowing where it's going to end up and how it's advancing the story. So that's really knowing the purpose of it, so it isn't just a crash for the sake of a crash.
Yeah, right. I mean, the best action movies are the ones where the action is very definitely core to the plot. And so, so it might just be a car chase, but will the woman, pursue the person who abducted her daughter or son or whatever? There's reasoning behind it, I assume.
Right. And integral in that reasoning is a sense of stakes and tension. Like you just said, will the woman get to her daughter or whatever?
Yeah.
So if you've got characters engaging in a chase or a fight or whatever the action happens to be, the reason the reader will care about the chase or the fight is because the reader cares about the character's goals and what the character stands to win or lose as a result of this piece of action. And we live in a world where we are inundated with action scenes. I mean, in commercials even, you cannot escape them. So if you've seen one crash or one explosion, it's hard to make the crash or the explosion the be-all and end-all. So what is going to invest a reader, regardless of the size of the action, is the investment in the character, in the stakes and tension.
In the stakes, yeah. So it's a good point. So knowing where it's heading, the reason why it's heading that way, and then what's at stake within that action scene. Or in this case, we're specifically talking about real action scenes like chases or fights, etc.
Right. And then once you've got all of that worked out, and you're going to write, say it's the fisticuffs
yes,
that we mentioned at the opening, then you've got to get your choreography down, because you need clarity. Key to a reader enjoying reading an action scene is being able to visualize it in the mind's eye, being able to track it, and for it to make sense. Because if your reader goes, wait, he threw that punch with his left hand, but wasn't that the one that was... And the reader's pulled out of the story, and you lose that engagement that you're working so hard to maintain.
Yeah. So would you then slow it down there first to see what your choreography is going to be?
Yeah, before I even begin writing, I would choreograph it just like a choreographer for dance would. I would figure out who is going to do what in each story beat to which other character and how that's going to play out. And then you also have to track things like injuries for continuity, So if your character gets stabbed in the right leg, it's going to be hard to jump or climb. So, and if he's limping with the right leg and then it switches to the left leg. And so you kind of have to construct like a manual to the fight in your pre-writing stage as you develop the scene, so that you don't lose track of the elements yourself before you even present them to the reader.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about continuity, as well as it's going to go beyond, because if there is injury, we've all read books where the character miraculously makes a recovery next chapter, and the bullet wound that was in the last chapter in their thigh is now just a scratch.
Right. Yes, I just hate that.
Yeah, I don't. Yes, my bullet wounds always take forever to heal, and these.
I know. How did they get so lucky? Yes.
But it's interesting where we're thinking about slowing it down, and I think this is where writing is very different to movie production, but not script writing, which is the whole thing where you've got to decide which of those fight action beats are key to delivering a sense of pace to the reader. And yet they've got to be written slow enough that the reader can digest them, but still get a sense that it's a fast action setting. In this particular case, we're talking about fast action. Obviously, there is slow action.
Right. Well, and there's a rule of thumb that the faster the action, the slower it is on the page, because you need that clarity, and because you need to present so many different elements to the reader almost simultaneously. It isn't, because reading is linear, but just like on a movie screen, you can have two guys fighting in the foreground and dogs chasing someone across the midground and an explosion in the background, and all of that is taken in the visual field simultaneously. So in writing, in order to create the experience of simultaneity, you have to really slow down the action and break it into different elements, decide which ones are key and in which moment, and then craft all of that. So what could be 3 seconds on a screen could be, 2 pages in a novel.
Yeah, exactly. And yet you still want to have the reader to read those 2 pages and feel like it was, passed that quickly.
Yeah.
So I think it's really quite tricky, much more tricky than you think. It's not until you start attempting it you think, oh man, this is hard.
Right. It is tricky. It's extremely tricky. And that experience of the reader feeling like it happened very fast comes down to that engagement and the stakes and tension. So you want the reader's tension to be high throughout the action scene in order to create that fast pace, that moment of exhilaration, even though that moment lasts 2 or 3 pages or a full chapter, depending on the story and what's happening. And you also need to create a rhythm to it. You don't want to just like spike somebody's adrenaline and then shake them up there. So in everything there are these moments of taking a breath, these breathers, whether, like they're in the clench and then the protagonist escapes the villain's hands and rolls away, and you get that second to grab a weapon off the floor and scope the room for other people running into the scene and sort of regroup and reapproach the villain. So all of those moments give us that sense of ebb and flow, rise and fall through the action without dropping the overall tension, but while giving us that room to breathe, and also to take in more than what's immediately available to the protagonist.
Yes, because you're going to have close camera action, but also there's that potential peripheral vision where protagonist might just catch somebody moving in from the doorway and needs to deal with that. But you can't, when you're writing that, zoom the reader in on that, because that's not realistic. If you're engaged in combat with someone, you're not going to say, "Oh, wait, hold on a moment there. I've just noticed someone at the door I need to go over and deal with."
Well, you can if you're using your narrator effectively up to a point within those parameters. So just like the movie camera can zoom in and show you the two faces filling up the entire movie screen while they're in that clinch, the camera can also pan out and show us whatever, the rescue team arriving on scene or something before the protagonist and antagonist break apart even. So you want to use your narrator the way the director uses the movie camera to frame the scene effectively and show the reader what's relevant at the moment. And don't forget that your character has more than one sense. Everything in the world isn't visual. So you might be looking, at your villain's gold tooth while you're strangling him, but you hear the sirens approaching, and if you can make it another 60 seconds, your partner's going to arrive or whatever. So there are lots of different ways to cue the reader in to a larger scene than that one embattlement.
And I think you make a really good point about the senses as well. One of the things that I loved about learning neurolinguistic programming was the idea of engaging other people through their primary senses, and I think good writers are really clever at just dabbing in, dropping in the senses here and there. And I know I tend to write very visually, and it's often when I go back and revise that I can see, hang on a minute, this entire action sequence happened without any sound, or somebody got slapped but they never felt it. And so it's really important to I think anyways, what brings it alive is the richness of the media, and that also is probably a little bit of an advantage over the movies, because well, a well done movie, yes, you are going to put yourself in the character's head, but in a book, if it's well written, you really are in that. I remember reading a torture sequence where I was the tension in my body and the sweat that was starting to come on my skin just from reading, just the way it was written. It's just amazing that somebody can do that can twist your sense of kinesthetics and touch and feel. Because it's all very well to show visual torture. Oh, there were chains, or there were ice picks, or things being sliced. But that's all very well. But it's not until we describe how that feels for a character that the reader is all of a sudden starting to really squirt.
Right. And an interesting piece of reader empathy is just the anticipation of something. Because if you, let's say you describe this piece of torture in a way that you find effective, but maybe other people don't, or some other people don't, but everybody is going to anticipate that thing coming in their own unique way. And that's what's going to make them squirm and cringe, so like Jess is tortured in the second Scott Hall book, and the guy is working on pulling out one of her fingernails. So seeing this guy coming at her with the pliers should make the reader squirm as much as, or even more so than when he's actually working on the nail, and I described the pliers. She's got short nails, so he's trying to get a grip on the nail, but it's really short, so the pliers kind of like pinching her finger and slipping off. And that anticipation is mounting of like, oh,
So I'm not coming near you when you've got the toolbox.
Yeah, I know. I'm a dark, scary person. Not really. But this brings up a point that whatever you're writing, any scene, but especially a high stakes, high tension scene like an action scene, you need to have in mind what you want the reader to feel. Keep that effect in mind, and then craft those moments within the scene to create that effect in the reader.
Yeah, it's like any piece of writing, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Whether it's dialogue or exposition, it's intended to create an experience for the reader. And so if this experience is just a visual flashing of fists and things, well, if that's what you intended and it only needed to be a quick barroom brawl, then perhaps that's fine. But if what you wanted was an in-your-face sense of, sweaty, close-fisted, head-butting, bone-cracking action, then, that takes a lot more thinking through, I think. And I would also say back again that revision is your real friend here, because sometimes in the first draft, your mind is going a million miles an hour with the movie sequence of this fight, and then when I come back and reread it a month later after the draft is written, I think, what on earth was I thinking? So,
right.
What was a whirl of swords and lasers and whatever? Suddenly it just looks like about a paragraph of somebody hitting someone else and an arm dropping off. And no, that's not what I wanted.
Yes. Yeah. And, it's always important, but especially in these action scenes, to remember that the reader's not in your head. The reader doesn't see the movie in your mind. The reader only has your words. So that clarity piece is so critical. And, one thing I find a lot of is, he punched with his right hand. He stepped with his left foot. He dodged that blow from the guys. And those left and right, that specificity becomes tedious, and it reduces the fluidity of the scene and the pacing of the scene. So you need to know when you need that kind of specificity for clarity, but then also pull back from it sometimes and let the reader trust the reader's imagination to get it. So it's a fine balance between like too much and not enough.
Yeah. Well, I think it comes back to what you were saying about the choreography. It's a dance. So write the dance out in full as much as you can anyway, trying to get out what's happening possibly quite quickly in your mind's eye. And then when you come back to it, start taking things out until it doesn't make sense, put the last one back in again, so that there's just enough in there to convey the sense of pace that you want from the scene, but not so much that it over describes it, because that's not realistic either. I mean, a lot of the things that we might write 2 pages for might be 8 seconds worth of action. So it's a lot of words to describe something. If you overdo it, it's easy to overdo it, isn't it? Over-explain a fight sequence. Yeah. And then you do get lost.
Definitely. And also, we can get our heads stuck in the physicality of the fight scene, almost to the point of forgetting that there's an emotional aspect of the fight scene as well. So you've got to deal with your point of view character on so many levels. You've got the physical contact with whatever the antagonist or obstacle is, and then you've also got senses like pain, the physical, like that guy just punched me in the face, or I got stabbed in the gut, or whatever, all of that physical stuff. But then you've got the adrenaline spiking and the emotion. So there are so many different physical levels that you can tap into, and you don't want to try and have everything omnipresent, but find the moment where it's going to be most effective and the most impactful to bring in a sense of fear or a sense of, unusual calm. Like, where did that come from? Suddenly I just clicked and I knew when to make this move or when to whatever. So play with the different aspects of what's going through your character's mind, body, nervous system, glands, hormones, like all of it, sweat, gritting teeth. There's so many different things we can draw on to convey to the reader the stress and the physicality or exhilaration, or, it doesn't have to be a fight scene. It doesn't have to be bad. It could be an athletic scene. It could be a race or something really exhilarating.
Yes, yeah, we've very much zeroed in on the fight scenes because it's probably the easiest way to maybe take apart the mechanism of this sort of thing, because it applies to everything, even a dance of starships, firing laser cannon. It's going to happen at a potentially different pace, and there are different things to describe. But you still have to think the same way. It's not just going to be pew pew and it's over.
I should hope not. That'd be like the 8-year-old's story for
Star Wars.
For second grade or something. Yes. Pew pew, the bad guy's ship blew up. The end.
Yeah, that's it. Done.
Done. Definitely. Wow.
So what about wider action scenes then? Maybe we've got several moving parts. How do you approach those? So say for example, we do have there might be 3 different groups trapped in a building. We know there's a bomb going to go off somewhere. We know that the fire department are on their way, but they've been misled, going to the wrong building. That's also action. It's a very broad-based action thing.
It is. You're going to have to break it down the same way you would the fisticuffs type scene. If you've got 3 groups, say you've got 3 point of view characters, and they're all in different locations, so you're going to have at a minimum scene breaks, probably chapter breaks, or even better, just for a clear delineation between each point of view. So then you're going to have shorter chapters and a greater intensity, but you're going to have you're going to need to keep variety in mind. So if it's at the stage where everyone's rushing into the building and nobody knows where the bomb is, everyone's kind of doing the same thing at that point. So what's going to happen to make each section exciting for the reader? Maybe one section has bomb sniffing dogs and the dogs are going crazy. Maybe another group gets trapped in an elevator because the power goes out when they're on their way somewhere. Maybe the other group, encounters some bad guys who didn't make it out in time, and so they're fighting. So it's going to come down to the same aspects of craft, because you've got the one point of view character, but you're going to have to use your narrative to expand the scene even more than you would in a really tight, like hand-to-hand combat scene, because you've got more players in each of those 3 places.
And all those moving parts have to end up somewhere for some reason as well. So you've got to kind of work backwards. Well, who do I want to end up where? And who has survived, who has unfortunately didn't make it, who's injured, and why has it ended up that way? How is that driving the story forward? So you're not just writing an action scene for the sake of being exciting, which is fine. It's fine to want to do it in the first place for that. But the real skill is then weaving it into, this has now been a turning point for a character, or it's been a major plot, a plot turn as well, or a twist even. Yeah.
Well, the thing to remember...
I like what you... Yeah, go on.
I was just going to say, the thing to remember about that 3 groups scenario is that you need the reader to be equally engaged with each of your 3 point of view characters. So they all need compelling, exciting drama happening for them. And we need to care about the stakes for each of those 3, perspective characters. So if somebody feels extra, if that isn't carrying its weight to move the story forward, cut it, sideline that character, get them out of that action sequence, put them in the call center or something, and just focus on the 1 or the 2 groups that are really doing the work to engage the reader and carry us through the action.
And I think also you reminded me of something there with having this example of, say, 3 moving parts like that. One of those rules of fiction that I really like is a lot of, unfortunately, I think a lot of writers do break. It's a pet peeve of mine, is where every time they face conflict, it's the same conflict again, or the same type of conflict. So it's always up against one person with a gun. Well, what about, you come out one person with a sword? It's a little bit different. Or so with those three moving parts, I would look as well to make them, as you said, all doing different things, not necessarily facing the same conflict. So you said it kind of probably unconsciously with the mind of an editor, thinking, well, this is what these guys would be doing, the bomb sniffing. These guys would be stuck in the elevator. These guys would be
in a fist fight.
maybe dueling with the bad guys, in the fist fight. But maybe the naive writer would think, okay, well, they all need to be fighting the fire. So I've got a group on the top floor fighting the fire. I've got a group in the middle who are also trying to get the hose there, and I've got a group underneath fighting their way up blankets. And it could be exciting. It's not as exciting if the conflicts are different and with different stakes that all relate to those point of view characters.
Yes, absolutely. And if you've got that situation of, say you've got, your book is about firefighters, and 3 of the firefighters have points of view, and all 3 of those guys are in the same, building fire. Don't try to show what all 3 of them are doing at the same time, because it is repetitive and then dull. So pick one, and maybe that guy meets one of the other point of view characters we really like. And so you can get all 3 of them in the same scene to do the climax of this action sequence together. But just pick one of them to be the point of view vehicle through this action sequence so that we don't get repetition.
And another good tip is, I've learned from starting to do dictation, is it does help if you're not sat in a seat writing sometimes.
Yes.
It's quite good to actually get up and move around, even if you're not reenacting this sequence, which obviously could look a little odd if someone was poking their head through the window at the time.
Well, I do
What's
that.
What's the guy doing, wearing the headphones there, kicking the living daylights out of something invisible?
Right. And I recommend people do that. You should actually, okay, you might not have a friend punch you in the face, but if you're thinking like, okay, this person's fist connects here, which way is the head going to move? What part of the jaw does that connect with? How is it going to feel, reverberating through the skull bones? And it just helps you to create the effects you need in words when you can kind of feel it. Use, real sensory input to help your imagination.
But they do say that's something that human beings are particularly skilled at, which is proprioception, and also being able to extend our proprioception to understand what it's like for somebody else moving through space as well. And I think as a writer, that's a skill really developing. Probably those of us who have done body-based practices. So, you and I, for example, both yoga practitioners, and that I've found terrific for developing a sense of proprioception, because I'm basically dead from the head down. So I just don't feel anything. It's completely exists in my head the whole time, and full of logic. And it really does help to be in your body for when you're writing very close shot action sequences. But in general as well. I mean, even if it's a car chase, you need to know how the driver's being thrown around in the seat, or whether the passenger isn't wearing the belt, and there's going to be some issues there. Knowing how bodies get thrown around is important.
It is, and I don't want anybody to go hurt themselves, but you can do things like put your hand in a bowl of ice water for 10 seconds. When the Titanic exhibit was going around many years ago, the museum had a wall of ice, and there are all of these handprints kind of melted into it, because people were encouraged to press their hand to the wall of ice and just see, this is what the water felt like for the people who were not in a rowboat, not in a lifeboat, who were in the water. How long can you handle that temperature just on your hand, not even submerged in it? So if you need to, without hurting yourself, go play around with the sensory experience you need to give your character, that you need to convey, and see what you can do to approximate it.
Excellent. I like it. Bringing that kinesthetic back in again.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to wrap this up. Do you have any final thoughts on action scenes?
No, I don't. Not without going crazy wide, because I think we've covered the sort of the tight shot stuff, but it'd be an interesting thing to come back to and look at more grander action pieces perhaps at a later stage.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure we'll do another episode on action scenes. So, all right. Thank you, everybody, for listening. You can find all of our shows at storyworkspodcast.com.